Section 6 of Weird Tales Double Feature, The Death Pit and In Kashla's Garden, by Oscar Schisgall. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain, read by Ben Tucker. In Kashla's Garden, Chapter 1. In amazement that verged on downright consternation, old Mr. Curry, the attorney, sank back in his chair and gaped at the agitated man opposite him.
You mean to say, he demanded incredulously, that your wife exerts a power as strong as that over you?
As strong as that? It's stronger! Oh, 1,000 times stronger than you can possibly imagine! Trembling with the despair that filled him, Roger Byrd almost sobbed the words. His fists were fiercely clenched on the lawyer's desk, one of them continuously pounding as if to release compressed energy. Deep in his haggard eyes lurked the flames of unutterable anguish. He looked in truth as though he were battling to crush down explosive hysteria. Uneasily, Mr. Curry swallowed and wet his lips. He grumbled something indistinguishable. Then, scowling, he muttered,
I never heard of anything so uncanny.
At that, Byrd leaned forward, while those brilliant eyes of his burned into the attorney's. "You never heard of hypnotism?" he challenged, and his tones raced up the scale to a shrill, defiant pitch.
Well, yes, of course, but not to such an astonishing extent. I thought... Why, really, Byrd, this is quite beyond me.
Profoundly bewildered, Mr. Curry brushed an unsteady hand up over his moist forehead and allowed it to sweep back across his pompadour of silken, unflecked whiteness. Staring at the man who had come to him with so extraordinary a problem, he encountered only an expression of impotent wretchedness. He scratched his chin, nervously tapped the edge of the desk.
Suppose, he suggested, you tell me how you became the victim. That is, how you were subjected to such an influence. I confess I'm totally confounded. If you want advice, you will have to explain more clearly.
Roger Byrd rose, not as another man might rise for a recital, but with a sudden spring that caused his chair to fly back tottering. His right fist delivered a final blow upon the desk. Then, glowering at the floor, he began striding about the lawyer's study. He was still a young man, just venturing into his 30s, yet the lines which had of late been carved in his dark skin added at least a decade to his appearance. A quivering tenseness had beset his tall figure, so that under his gray suit every muscle seemed vibrant as he paced the room. He was troubled, moreover, by the disheveled condition of his black hair. Time after time he was constrained to throw it back with an impatient jerk of his head, a gesture that merely emphasized the strain upon him. "It started 2 years ago, in Calcutta," he began.
Where you met your wife," murmured Mr. Curry, nodding.
"Yes. You know I was making a trip through India."
"You had gone there, I remember," interrupted the lawyer somewhat coldly, "to escape the scandal of that affair with the Royler woman."
Byrd whirled around to glare across the desk. A flood of scarlet rushed into the cheeks that had been pallid. He raised one hand impetuously, but let it fall again after an instant of silence. "Mr. Curry," he said, a strange harshness creeping into his tones, "I'll ask you to forget my past troubles at this moment. I have enough to worry me without being reminded of other things."
"I beg your pardon,"
said the attorney, but his shrug belied the earnestness of his apologetic inflection. Byrd frowned. He looked down at the carpet as though to recall the narrative he had momentarily abandoned, and then, resuming his nervous pacing, he continued without glancing at the lawyer. "In Calcutta I met a friend, an American, who told me about the wonderful powers of Kashla. Mystic powers, he called them. She had a booth in the marketplace where she entertained tourists by demonstrating her hypnotic ability, for a price, of course. I went to her. I went with that air of superior cynicism all travelers affect, ready to scoff at her trickery. I thought I should find an old hag, dirty and fawning. Well, my first surprise came when I saw Kashla. She was young and in a way beautiful. We chatted pleasantly, we laughed. You know how two people can be. Naturally, I still disbelieved in her mystic power, and so she offered to prove to me what she could do." Byrd paused. His fingers moved across his lips, shaking. For an instant he shut his eyes, although whether it was to conjure up or blot out some awful memory, the lawyer could not guess. But the silence passed, and Roger Byrd proceeded, rather unsteadily and in staccato syllables. She made me sustain the gaze of her eyes. Black eyes, Mr. Curry. Terrible eyes. They blazed. They stung. They made me sway dizzily. I don't know what happened. All I know is that I regained consciousness 2 hours later, and I was lying on my bed in my hotel. The two men regarded each other across the desk, one gaping blankly, the other peering with savage intensity. Mr. Curry once more smoothed his white hair. Again he wet his lips. When he spoke, it was in a queerly hushed way. "You mean you were in a trance all that time?" "Yes. I walked home in a trance. She controlled me from her booth. Controlled me implicitly. Of course, I rushed back to her. I was filled with wonder and astonishment. But Kashla only laughed at my excitement. And do you know what she said?" Mechanically, Mr. Curry shook his head, his eyes wide, marveling. "I remember her words distinctly. I shall always remember them," whispered Roger Byrd. He had come to lean over the desk. Now his flushed features hovered directly over Mr. Curry's round face. He dropped word after word as though each were a stunning blow. "She said this: 'I have subjugated your mind and your will. Henceforth, if I desire it, you are mine.'" The attorney uttered an exclamation that dwindled into a grunt. "But that was nonsense," he protested. "Oh, was it?" cried Byrd, sneering. "Well, listen. I thought so too. I ridiculed her. She told me that a mind once conquered remained hers, and offered to prove this new contention. She assured me that at 7 o'clock the following evening, regardless of what other plans I had made, I should be in her booth. It chanced that I had an engagement to dine with friends at that hour. I was not at all afraid of Kashla. In fact, I almost forgot her the next evening. And at 6:30 I arrived at the home of my dinner host. I distinctly recall hearing a servant announce the meal. I even recall starting toward the dining room while I chatted with an eminent Hindu. Then a puzzled expression leaped into Byrd's eyes. Then something happened. My mind suddenly went blank. What I did, or how, I cannot say, but when my senses returned to me, it was precisely 7. And there I stood, in Kashla's booth, blinking down at her while she laughed. Stirred, visibly affected, Mr. Curry reached for a cigar. He lit a match, thoughtfully held it until its flame scorched his fingertips, and cast it away without having puffed once. Keenly squinting up at Kashla's victim, he asked, "And she has never lost this power over you?" "Never," declared Byrd. "When she learned I was rich, that I had a fortune in America, she decided to marry me. She decided, you understand. I tried to run away from her. Indeed, I went as far as Bombay, when one day, while purchasing a steamship ticket, I suddenly lost consciousness. The next thing of which I was aware was being back in Calcutta, beside the laughing Kashla." Evidently the recital was plucking as severely upon Mr. Curry's nerves as upon his credulity. He rose, a thick-set, stocky man with a loose double chin. Again he indulged in his habitual gesture of brushing back his white pompadour. Looking at Byrd sternly, he demanded, "Are you trying to tell me that you traveled from Bombay to Calcutta in a trance?" Roger Byrd emitted a short laugh, a bitter, wrathful laugh. "You don't believe it," he snarled sardonically. "All right. Let me go on. I did go to her in a trance. In that condition, I moved as rationally, as safely as though I were myself. The only difference is that I am controlled by her will, her mind, instead of by my own." "But despite that, you married her." "What else could I do? She willed me to marry her." "Eh? She willed?" "Certainly," snapped Byrd, relaunching his quick paces and communing now with the floor rather than with the staring lawyer. "She compelled me to marry her, made me want to do it. Do you think that under normal circumstances, I, Roger Byrd, who can marry any one of a dozen rich American girls, would have selected an Indian mystic from a Calcutta marketplace? Pah! Think, Mr. Curry, think! Throughout Byrd's agitated talk, the attorney had been striving to compose himself, that he might consider this extraordinary situation sensibly, unemotionally. Now, eyeing his client, he saw matters more clearly. Roger Byrd had always been an impulsive creature of a sensitive and high-strung nature. That a hypnotist could dominate him was not so strange after all, for his own will had been lamentably weak. Since childhood, it had been merely a weather vane pointing the direction of other people's desires. Yet Byrd was ostensibly suffering, and the old attorney could not help scowling in concern.
"I understand," he said slowly, "that you wish me to find a way of obtaining a divorce for you, or an annulment, if possible."
"Yes, I'm sick of being mastered. She made me install her here in my home, and half my servants quit. So she imported servants from India. She redecorated many of the rooms so that I live in an Oriental museum rather than a house. I'm tired of it, I tell you. Whatever she wishes, I am forced to do. Anything at all. If I don't do it voluntarily, I do it under the spell of her will. I tell you, Mr. Curry, if I can't get rid of that woman, I may as well kill myself."
"Oh, now,"
soothingly mumbled the lawyer, though he was frowning down at his desk in a manner far from reassuring.
"I wouldn't talk like that, Byrd."
"Because you haven't lived as I have for the past 2 years. An absolute mental slave. Why, I can't even run away. She makes me come back. Distance is no barrier." Of a sudden, Roger Byrd sank into a chair. He bent far forward, sent his fingers writhing through his disheveled black hair, and in utter wretchedness he moaned, "I'd rather be dead than go on like this, without a will of my own." For a long time, absolute stillness gripped the room. Mr. Curry moved to a window where, his hands clasped behind his back, he stood gazing out over a Westchester panorama of rolling fields sprinkled with colorful rooftops, the whole scene drenched in golden morning sunshine. Beneath his window, his blue automobile waited to hasten him to his New York office. Looking to the left, he could discern the white residence of Roger Byrd, an imposing house visible through a screen of poplars aligned in military precision. It was less than a quarter of a mile away, a fact which had facilitated this early call. But Mr. Curry was not pondering upon the things he saw. Instead, his thoughts were focused on the character of his despairing client. The friendship he manifested toward Byrd was based upon an ancient family intimacy, rather than on any personal esteem or respect, for Roger Byrd was scarcely the type to inspire admiration. In the past 10 years, he had been involved in half a dozen deplorable escapades with women, affairs that had cost him amazing sums. The last of them had sent him scurrying off to India, that he might escape the presence of an irate lady named Edwina Royler. That his flight had resulted in this tragic situation was perhaps unfortunate, yet it was possessed of a certain poetic justice which Mr. Curry was compelled to appreciate. Suddenly his reverie was shattered by Byrd's exclamation, "Well, what's to be done?" The lawyer turned, fingering his heavy watch chain. Quietly he answered, I don't know. This case is new in my experience, I must confess. I should like time to think, to consider." "Then in heaven's name," cried Byrd, jumping up, "think fast. I've been suffering 2 years, and they've seemed to me 2 centuries. End of In Kashla's Garden, Chapter 1.